What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? We'll discuss the kind of rough spring training outing for Brandon Pfaadt and Tommy Henry, and then why not project the Dbacks bullpen entering the 2024 season?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com to see all of my latest work. We're going to be talking a whole lot about spring training on today's podcast because, of course, we saw Tommy Henry and Brandon Pfaadt both have their outing. I guess at the time of you guys listening to this podcast, yesterday, Monday afternoon, and the outing didn't go as planned for both those pitchers, so we'll definitely talk about that. And why not project the Dbacks bullpen entering the season, because I don't think we've done that exercise yet on this podcast, so we'll also talk about that on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, which, speaking of which, thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available. All platforms. Please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. We are trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before opening day, so please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's talk about that D-back spring training outing, because we saw two potentially important pieces in this D-backs rotation. Brandon Pfaadt definitely going to be a part of this D-backs rotation. We saw him start Monday's spring training outing with Tommy Henry, the guy who is potentially in line to win the number 5 job. He came in out the bullpen right after Pfaadt. And Tommy Henry is someone that has been very dominant and has looked extremely good throughout this spring training. And in this outing was not his best stuff. Brandon Pfaadt, I think this was only the second time we've seen in this spring training, and he was all right. Still not the best version of Brandon Pfaadt, but I don't think he's too concerned with how he's looked so far. Both those guys, I mean, maybe not both of them. Brandon Pfaadt is definitely still more of a work in progress at this point of spring training than probably a Tommy Henry is. Tommy Henry's probably a little bit more caught up in terms of his development and ramp-up process throughout this offseason. And both of those guys, I mean, we got major expectations for both those guys entering this season. Brandon Pfaadt projected to be the number 4 starter. Tommy Henry battling for the number 5, and he's been in the lead all offseason. And for Tommy Henry, I mean, this outing definitely hurts him more than Brandon Pfaadt. For Brandon Pfaadt, like, we know he's locked into that number 4 job. We want him to look better than what he did today. But I still don't think we're too upset. I think we still thought it was a solid showing for Brandon Pfaadt. He can definitely be better. Didn't execute as well he would probably like to. I think the slider needs to be a little bit better. It's something he talked about coming out of this game. I think he wants his fastball location to be a little bit better as well, but he thought some things were clicking in the game and he thought he felt good. And still, Brandon Pfaadt a lot earlier in his ramp-up process as opposed to Tommy Henry, so I think we're a little bit more okay with this struggle from Brandon Pfaadt early in spring training, because he's someone that has started his ramp-up process a little bit later than some of these other pitchers on this D-back staff. But for Tommy Henry, for someone that's been cruising through spring training, like, this one definitely hurt his stock just a little bit, because when you think about that battle for the number 5 starter, Ryan Nelson has been so good this spring training so far. For Tommy Henry, this is his first hiccup so far this camp, and we'll see how much it dings him in this camp battle for the number 5 starter. I don't think one outing is going to break, I think, the D-backs' feelings around who is going to win this job, but I do definitely think it hurts Tommy Henry's case, at least for today. If Ryan Nelson goes out there in his next outing and goes 3 innings, no earned runs, 6 strikeouts, like, you know what? Maybe Ryan Nelson does leapfrog Tommy Henry in this battle for the number 5 starter. So we'll see. Both of these guys need to execute better. It's earlier in the ramp-up process for Brandon Pfaadt, so I think we're okay with him struggling a little bit in the beginning. But as we get closer to opening day, Brandon Pfaadt needs to start performing better and needs to start looking better. For Tommy Henry, he's looked really good so far this spring training. This was his worst outing of the day. I mean, these Chicago White Sox hitters just did a really good job of locking in and keying in on Tommy Henry's stuff. And for once, Tommy Henry's stuff wasn't able to be as effective as it once was, through the first couple turns through his spring training outing. So I still have a lot of belief in both of these guys. I don't think these are omens for what's going to happen in the regular season. I mean, for Tommy Henry, if this is an omen for the regular season, even though he got roughed up today, I think we'll take the totality of what we've seen through the first, 3 or 4 appearances he's had. He still has a 3.68 ERA this spring training. So if you tell me that's an omen for the regular season, we'll definitely take a mid to high 3s, number 5 starter in the rotation. For Brandon Pfaadt, I hope this isn't an omen for him. 9 ERA so far through spring training, but once again, small sample size for him, and he's still trying to ramp up after not pitching a ton this offseason. So I'm not really worried with either one of those guys. Tommy Henry, I still think, is in that lead for the number 5 job, but I do think Ryan Nelson's going to make this a close competition, especially if he continues the role he's on. But again, Tommy Henry definitely in the lead for that number 5 job right now. And Brandon Pfaadt, we're not worried just yet, but do want to see him start to perform better as we get closer to the regular season. And then looking at that lineup, Ketel Marte once again just continues to crush at the plate. A walk, a hit. Marte has been absolutely phenomenal this spring training. As I keep saying, I think we're in for a mega Ketel Marte season. Above 300 average, maybe over 900 OPS, maybe some pop as well. Maybe he becomes a major RBI producer in the middle of the lineup. I think the advanced stats are going to love Ketel. I think the traditional counting numbers are going to love Ketel. I just think he looks so locked in at the plate. I think the confidence he has coming off that World Series run, I'm all in on monster, all-star, potential MVP Ketel Marte this season. Of course, we saw Blaze Alexander also get a hit in this game. He continues to rake his average back up to 400 after this game. Jace Peterson, he even got a hit. He's been someone that has been really good so far this spring training. He's also, I guess you could say, in the battle for backup shortstop. He's more of a second base, third baseman type, but Jace Peterson also fighting for a backup role to start the season. He's trying to be there on opening day on the active roster, and who knows, maybe he will be. Had himself another good game. Jose Herrera, he got himself a hit today. He's up to a 300 average this spring with a 429 OBP. You do like to see that. Jordan Lawler didn't have his best day, but that's okay. Jordan Lawler still having himself a very impressive spring training. And overall, on the day, Dbacks take the loss to the Chicago White Sox. They dropped to 5-6 this spring training. Again, I don't care too much about the record for the Dbacks. We just mostly want to see flashes from their prospects, from their starters, things like that. But I think the pitching is always kind of important. Whenever I see, your potential starters struggle in spring training, that does always make me a little bit nervous. But I'm not going to worry too much about the Erods and the Brandon Pfaadt just yet. Once the regular season actually starts, and if those guys continue to struggle, then we can revisit the conversation of what happened to those pitchers. But until we get to that moment, I just want to see the D-backs come out of spring training healthy, and I want to see all these players feeling good about themselves, even if their numbers weren't that good this spring training. Now we'll talk about the D-backs projected bullpen and how I think it's going to fall as we enter the 2024 regular season. But first, I want to talk to you guys about this new sponsor that we now have for the pod, and it is called Prize Picks. Because Prize Picks is North America's largest daily fantasy sports platform. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And the app has a fun new feature called Demons and Goblins. Demon picks are marked in red, and they are the scary picks that accelerate your heartbeat because you can win big money, as in 100 times your money. So if you bet $10, you can win $1,000. If you're into the NBA, you can pick more than or less than on everything from three-pointers made to turnovers committed. And for spring training baseball, you can pick more than or less than on pitcher strikeouts and first inning runs. So download the app today and enter code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's code LOCKEDONMLB, all one word, and all in lowercase letters, and get that first deposit match up to $100. Join Prize Picks today. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Welcome back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's project the potential Dbacks bullpen on opening day, because there's a lot of candidates for the Dbacks bullpen. So we'll start probably with guys who are most likely and then work our way down the order here. And we'll also talk about some honorable mentions. So there is a whole bunch of guys to get into. So we'll be a little bit rapid fire here, I guess. But of course, the closer for this season will be Paul Sewald. No discussion there. Paul Sewald, again, I think is a pretty good bet to lead the National League in saves. I think he's kind of a fun dark horse to pick. I think if you go on FanDuel and place that little wager down, I don't think you will really lose money this upcoming season. I think you could potentially gain a whole lot in your wallet. So I would just think about placing a little wager down. Paul Sewald to lead the NL in saves this upcoming season. Kevin Ginkel locked into the closer role. He is good to go. Oh, excuse me, not the closer role, the setup man. I mean, Kevin Ginkel coming off a really impressive season for the Dbacks, where he did have himself a breakout year. We've always wanted Kevin Ginkel to be that guy, be potentially the closer of the future. Seems like the setup man of the future is more in his cards, but even with that being said, 2.48 ERA last year, below 1 WHIP. You'll definitely take that from your setup man of the future. So those two guys are locked into the bullpen. Then after that, you do have some controversy and some question marks. Like, I would say Joe Mantiply is a lock. I think the D-backs, it seems like they're probably going to go with 2 lefties. If that's the case, I think Joe Mantiply is the first lefty that they will choose. He's been around for a minute now, the last, 3 seasons? This is like his 4th season with the D-backs. Joe Mantiply has been an all-star before with the D-backs. So in terms of what his ceiling can be, like, the best version of Joe Mantiply is a guy back in 2022, 2.85 ERA, elite whip, strikeouts per 9 was actually pretty good as well. We all knew regression was going to come for Joe Mantiply, but I think we were willing to accept it with how good he's looked in the past and the fact that the D-backs always struggle to get good quality relievers. And with Joe Mantiply, when you look at his numbers from last year, first half ERA, 5.74, but in the second half, 3.86, so he's someone that got better as the season went along. Joe Mantiply, I think he's going to be locked into this D-backs bullpen as the first lefty specialist out the pen. And then after Mantiply, I think that's where the questions really start to come. Like if we're talking about locks for the bullpen, like Miguel Castro, he's probably going to be a lock because he's under contract for this upcoming season for like a few $1 million. Now, the thing with Miguel Castro, I wish he wasn't. If it was my way, Miguel Castro would be on the outside looking in because Castro was not good in the second half or postseason last year. So I think Castro will make the D-backs bullpen just because he's on a guaranteed contract and he does have a lot of experience. He is a guy that's still huge and can throw very hard, but he was just so disappointing down the stretch last year. First half ERA for Miguel Castro, 3.47. And if you remember those first couple months, April through May, he had a 2.3 ERA, those first 24 innings pitched. Then from the rest of the season on, he was absolutely horrendous, probably worse than that 5.4 ERA in the second half, because from June through August, he was able to clean it up. I mean, his last 11 innings, no earned runs, but from June to August, his ERA was like 7+. So like Miguel Castro was horrendous in the second half last year, and in the postseason, just not good either. And that's been kind of the case for Miguel Castro. I mean, you look at his career numbers. He's a career 4.15 ERA for his career. Always a high whip, always a lot of walks per nine. Yes, he has some seasons where he can strike out people, but his strikeouts seem to be going in the wrong direction. I'm not a big Miguel Castro guy. I wish he wasn't on this D-backs team. If I had my choice, he wouldn't be coming out the pen for the D-backs, but I think he will be in 2024. So far, Sewald, Ginkle, Mantiply, and Castro I think are locks. I think if you want like another kind of soft lock, but again, you got to talk about the contract. Give me Scott McGough, right? Like, again, we are not Scott McGough's fans on this podcast, but he's also someone under contract for this upcoming season, making $3 million this year, has a mutual option in 2025. McGough was terrible for the D-backs in 2023. 4.73 ERA, over 70 innings pitched for the D-backs this past year. And he was a guy where you just could never trust him in the biggest moments. And also another guy, terrible in the second half of the season. Scott McGough started the year, he was fine. First half ERA, 2.72 ERA in the first 46 innings pitched, made you feel good. But in the second half, 8.63 ERA in the second half of the season. Just got worse as the season went on. That was kind of the sneaky part about the D-backs bullpen last year. Part of the reason why the D-backs win that second half slump is because guys like Castro and McGough were absolutely horrendous in the second half of the season. And McGough was also someone that would just never really that good for the Arizona Diamondbacks at any point last year. I mean, he was never really good as a potential closer. Like whenever the D-backs tried to make him the closer last year, he really struggled in those situations, in safe situations last year. 4.26 ERA, and in non-safe situations, 5.27 ERA. So it really didn't matter whether it was a save or a non-save situation. Like Scott McGough was just bad in the back end of the bullpen for the D-backs last year. And some of the stats for him are just really weird. Like his first pitch stats, the batting average on his first pitch allowed, 4.07 with a 11.94 OPS on just the first pitch a batter sees. With no outs, 9.82 OPS allowed. So Scott McGough, some really disappointing numbers for him in the back end of the bullpen. And he was definitely a big hindrance and definitely held the D-backs back as the regular season went on last year. Not a big Scott McGough guy, but like a Miguel Castro, he's probably going to be in the back end of the bullpen just because of that guaranteed contract he's on. And then for the D-backs, if you're thinking about a second lefty, it's either going to be Kyle Nelson or Andrew Saalfrank. I think I'm going to go with Saalfrank here. He had 10.1 innings pitched last season, no earned runs, and he was solid in the postseason as well. I think the D-backs want to see what a larger sample size from Andrew Saalfrank looks like. Maybe he's not an elite reliever, but as your middle relief, second lefty specialist with a little weird sidearm action, like Saalfrank is not your typical reliever. He's got a little, he's got a little funkiness to him. He is a unique kind of a pitcher. So I think the D-backs do like him. I do think they like his pitching arsenal because this is not a guy with blow-away speed, right? This is more of a sinker, curveball kind of pitcher, trying to get those ground ball outs and sometimes those kind of pitchers are effective. And, not everyone in your pen can be a flamethrower. Sometimes you need someone to just come in and get that double play ball, and that's what Saalfrank can do. So for now, Sewald, Ginkle, Mantiply, Castro, McGough, Saalfrank, that's 6 people that I think are going to the D-backs bullpen on opening day. And I got 2 more names I want to discuss before we get into some honorable mentions. But of course, if you think the D-backs are going to win the 2024 World Series, then the place you need to place that futures bet on is, of course, FanDuel Sportsbook, because get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. My favorite thing to do is the same game parlay. Whenever the D-backs are playing, now that baseball season is in full swing, I like to take the D-backs money line. I like to take over on Carroll total bases and the over on Ketel Marte RBIs. That pays out at anywhere near plus 300. I am a lock. If you want to be a lock, just visit fanduel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. If you like the show, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now let's talk about two more guys who I think are going to the D-backs bullpen, because typically, of course, as we got to say, for anybody who might not know out there, roster sizes, most teams carry 13 pitchers. That's 5 starters, 8 relievers, and for the D-backs, feels like they typically carry 6 righties to 2 lefties. And so far, Sewell closer, Kevin Ginkel setup, Mantiply go-to lefty, and then Castro, McGuff we got in there because they're on guaranteed contracts. Sal Frank we think is going to be the second lefty. So who's going to be that potential 7th, 8th inning guy to get the ball to the Ginkel and Sewalds, and who's going to be potentially the long reliever out the pen for the D-backs? So the go-to, I think, guy to get the ball to Ginkel or Sewald, like if it's a lefty, it's going to be Mantiply. But your go-to righty out the pen for that 8th inning, I think, is going to be Ryan Thompson, who again came on the scene last year for the D-backs and was a revelation for this team. Another dude who has a little bit of a funky delivery and was just super effective for this D-backs team last season. Coming out of nowhere after being acquired late in the year, he had a .69 ERA over 13 innings pitched in the regular season. Another guy, sinker ball heavy with the slider. He does have a fastball, but another dude trying to induce ground balls and get guys to put a little wood on the ball and maybe create some weak contact, just like a Sal Frank. I like a bullpen. You got some dudes that could throw hard. With a Sewell could ratchet it up a little bit. A Ginkel could ratchet it up a little bit. A Castro can. A Ryan Nelson potentially can. But then you also got guys that could induce the ground ball with the Sal Franks and the Ryan Thompsons and the Joe Mantiply. So I like the balance that the D-backs have of guys that could throw hard or guys that could induce weak contact. Ryan Thompson, one of those guys that can induce weak contact, coming off a strong season with the D-backs. Never been a big strikeout guy, but if you can be elite at run prevention like he was last year, and like he's been in the past with Tampa Bay, the D-backs will definitely take that. So that leaves one spot left in the bullpen. Who does it go to? I just alluded to him just a second ago, but I think the D-backs want a long reliever to be, that 6 starter quasi in case Tommy Henry goes down, in case performance issues with Tommy Henry. You could be a spot starter. Or you could just be like your Nick Martinez type. Maybe, if the guy who was a starter was struggling a little bit, or maybe, they just got worked a lot. Maybe they only gave up 3 earned runs, but they can only go 4 innings or 3.2 innings pitch because they had to throw a lot of pitches. I think Ryan Nelson can be that Nick Martinez type to be your spot starter or be your extended inning, your multi-inning reliever out the pen. Ryan Nelson, been working on that slider, still a 2-pitch guy, but that slider has been much improved. The fastball looks a lot better too, has a little bit more life on it. I like Ryan Nelson out the pen. I like him as a long reliever. I think if Tommy Henry gets that number 5 job, I think Ryan Nelson is a lock to come out as the long reliever for the D-backs. And I think either Tommy Henry or Ryan Nelson are going to come out the pen. Like if Ryan Nelson wins the number 5 job, I think Tommy Henry could be the long reliever out the pen for the D-backs. So as it currently stands, I think the D-backs bullpen is going to be closer Sewald, setup Ginkel, 2 lefties in Mantiply, Sal Frank, go to eighth inning guy in Ryan Thompson, go to long reliever in Ryan Nelson, and then the guaranteed contracts in Miguel Castro and Scott McGough for your 8 relievers out the pen. And then talking about some honorable mentions, Luis Frias, I think he could be on the outside looking in. He could also be that long reliever, or maybe he replaces, if we're lucky, a McGough or Miguel Castro. But as it stands right now, I think Luis Frias would be on the outside looking in as potentially being the first guy called up from the minor leagues. Again, love the stuff from Luis Frias. I think he has nasty, nasty stuff. I want to see him on the major league level. I do think Luis Frias could have a quite large sample size with the D-backs this upcoming season if they do get off some of these guys like a Castro or a McGough at any point during the year. Peter Strzelecki, again, I can't say his name. I don't think he's going to start the year with the D-backs. He does have some good numbers from the past, but what we've seen so far this spring training hasn't been super impressive. So we'll see. Corbin Martin's back. I think he will start the year in the minor leagues. We just haven't seen a ton of healthy Corbin Martin, and when he has been healthy in the past, he hasn't been that good. I just think there's a lot better option than Corbin Martin right now on this D-backs camp roster. Bryce Jarvis, he looks like a lock to be going back to Reno because he's been struggling this spring training, but he also seems like a lock to at least get another chance with the D-backs at some point this year. A guy that still throws in the mid to upper 90s. I think we still all like Bryce Jarvis a lot, even though he might not start on the opening day active roster. I think that's okay. We still all think Bryce Jarvis has a path to being a good reliever for the D-backs at some point in the future. Kyle Nelson, I mean, he's going to be the go-to lefty from the minor leagues if Andrew Sal Frank and Joe Mansply are the 2 lefties to get the job. So even though Kyle Nelson might start the year in AAA, I don't think it'll be the last of Nelson that we see. Slade, again, another one of the guys that's going to be on the short list, especially as a spot starter. If Tommy Henry or Ryan Nelson, performance issues or injury issues, look at Slade to be probably the 3rd guy in line to be, that spot starter for the D-backs this upcoming season out their minor league system. Like, I think it'll go Tommy Henry, your number 5 starter. Ryan Nelson would be the first backup to that. And then Slade will be backing up Ryan Nelson as that potential spot starter for the D-backs in 2024. And then, of course, last but not least, Brandon Hughes, another guy fighting for a D-backs bullpen spot, has put up some good numbers in the past, but so far this spring training, he has looked fine, but I just think there's a lot more established options in the D-backs camp right now that they would probably choose over Brandon Hughes, but you never know. Does have some good numbers in the past, so maybe the D-backs like his history. Maybe they think they can make him replicate those numbers from his past with the D-backs this upcoming season, but as it currently stands, Sewald, Ginkel, Mansply, Castro, McGough, Sal Frank, Thompson, and Nelson would be my 8 D-backs relievers that I would pick for the opening day bullpen. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.